Hello everyone, thank you for joining us here, nice and early in Birmingham. It's so great to see so many of you in a room today, and thank you to City UK for having us and putting on another great conference. Super excited about all the interesting topics that we're going to cover here today, and I'm pleased to kick things off. Thank you, Bruce. There were some really inspiring remarks to set the scene for us for the day, and hopefully we can build on that from here. So I'm Nishnianidze. I'm the Trade Investment Director here at the City of London Corporation, and we work very closely in partnership with the City UK. We have very similar roles and objectives. I hope many of you know the role of the corporation, but if you don't, we're not just the governing body for the square mile in London. We actually see ourselves as having an important role and responsibility for supporting financial and professional services industry across the UK, championing our competitiveness and ensuring that we remain to be a leading financial services centre in the world through policy influence and facilitating investment flows and supporting businesses internationally. So that's our role, and we don't do it alone. We partner with the likes of City UK to do that. And today I'm very pleased to be talking to you about the important topic of devolution. I think it's very fitting that the first session is in Birmingham is to talk about the devolution and the role that it plays in driving economic growth. I will introduce my panel in a minute, but just a couple of points to set the scene for this topic. As we would have heard Bruce say before, and we've heard government talk a lot about the importance of economics growth. A couple of weeks ago, we had the Chancellor over to Mansion House with the Lord Mayor talking about the important role of the financial and professional services industry in driving growth, and some really key announcements to facilitate that. But importantly, what we've seen over the last 25 years is how devolution has helped contribute to that growth as well by setting specific targeted policies that really enable regions to focus on the right areas and drive that growth. In 2023, Birmingham, where we're sitting here today, became the largest city in the UK for FDI, which I think, after London, which I think is a huge achievement and really speaks to this policy and initiatives that they've been driving on the back of the devolution. We've also seen devolution contribute to important infrastructure initiatives and enabling jurisdictions like Birmingham and West Midlands drive important things like HS2, but we've also seen the important role that devolution has played in other parts of the UK, such as Manchester, and some of the wonderful work that Midas and others have been doing around facilitating and attracting investment into those parts of the UK as well as Leeds. We've seen devolution really support innovation and technology. We've seen really interesting accelerators and programs being rolled out across the UK to support that by devolved administrations. As the corporation, we've been very fortunate to partner on some of those initiatives, such as Super Tech West initiative with the West Midlands as well, and importantly skills as well. We've seen the fantastic role that the devolved administrations are doing in tapping into the strengths of their universities and really boost access to talent and skills in the right areas, and really driving that transition to digital skills as well. So the devolved administrations have done a lot of really positive and important things, and today we're going to talk to our panel a little bit about what's worked well, what has been some of the lessons learned, as well as what's been some of the challenges and the things that we can see government and others do more to support devolution and its impact on growth. So with that, I'm going to introduce my panel. So first of all, we're very pleased to be joined by Gurjit Jagpal, who is the head of Goldman Sachs Birmingham and Goldman Sachs Global Head of Investment Banking. So thank you for joining us, and it'll be really interesting to hear about how Goldman Sachs has been finding their operations here in Birmingham. We've got Rachel Taylor, who leads PwC's UK Government and Health Industries team and is helping shape strategy at the heart of the government to improve results on the front line. So welcome, Rachel. We've got Alex Bishop, is the National Head of the Dispute Resolution and Litigation Practice at the Shoosmiths and the head of the firm's Birmingham office, and a lot of really interesting experience here in Birmingham, which I'm sure we'll be able to tap into as we have our discussion. And very, very pleased to have Laura Shoaf with us as the Chief Executive of the West Midlands Combined Authority. So leading the good work and leading the good fight for the region. Laura is also the Chair of Shadow Great British Railways, overseeing improvements and reforms to Britain's rail system. So I do have a few questions for the panel, about 5 questions to get through, and then we will turn to you guys as well. So if you have any questions, please go to the app, load them in there, and I'll be able to see them here on my screen, or we will be able to come to the audience as well. So, but yeah, please do load your questions. So I will open things up, and as you jump in, feel free to also introduce a little bit more about the role and what you do here in Birmingham. The first question is actually to all of you. So the government has committed to the expansion of the Metro Mayor model. We're 8 years on here from the devolution in the Midlands. So it would be really great to hear your thoughts on the structure, the approach, what's it meant for the industry and for the growth agenda. And I'm not sure if, I don't know, maybe Laura, you want to go first, given the role?
I'm the obvious one who's going to say, well, of course. It's been great for the region, wouldn't I? And thank you for having me, and thank you to the chair. Normally, I have to start by giving all those stats about all the great things that I've achieved in the region. So I feel that the pressure is off. So thank you for that, and making sure that known as the second city, which we all know here that we are. For us in the West Midlands, the mayoral model has been a tremendous success. I would point out, I'm not taking any questions on Donald Trump, but however, the mayoral model is not unique around the world. And in fact, I would, if anything, argue we were a little bit late to the game. It's a really well-established model in other parts of the world. Where again it has made a big difference, and what I think it brings, really helpfully to the West Midlands, is a real focus on place, and all of the partners that it takes to make a place thrive, to come together around that mayoral model, and to be a real advocate for in this case the West Midlands. And what we have seen over the past 8 years is significant confidence grow in our region. And obviously you've heard stats on things like FDI, the relocation of Goldman Sachs, lots of partners on this stage that maybe weren't here 8 years ago. And part of that has come from a devolution of powers, but also significant funding for us to invest in infrastructure, be that transport infrastructure, be it energy or other infrastructure, alongside building housing and investing in our skills, which, although I am not in the private sector, I'm sure colleagues will comment on whether or not that helps to increase a place's attractiveness for it in terms of relocation. And I also think that it helps allow a place to define itself and the kind of growth it wants to have. And in the West Midlands, we've always been really conscious that we want to have inclusive growth. We have a very different kind of region than other regions. We have, in fact, different challenges than some of the other regions. So while everyone would like to see economic growth for us in this region, it's really important that it is felt and seen and is accessible to all of the people in the West Midlands. Birmingham is the youngest, most diverse city in Europe, and actually making sure that we have opportunities to harness the opportunity that brings to this region, and use it to benefit the region for the people in the region, I think is one of the big advantages that it's brought.
Absolutely. I guess maybe, Gurjit, to you, from the private sector perspective, you run the operations here in Birmingham. How are you finding, the competitiveness in response to some of the things that Laura's highlighted?
So our journey started 3 years ago here in Birmingham, so we're relatively new on the stage. But I was involved in the selection and when we were looking for a second city in the UK. And I would say the mayoral model, including the combined authority, was extremely helpful, I think. When making that kind of decision, and it's a big decision for ourselves to do that, there's many aspects that we need to look at. It's the talent, the skills, but also it's the place. Going back to what you said, it's office space, the hiring environment, the universities. So there's a lot of things that we had to explore, and the combined authority, together with the mayor's office, really connected us into that ecosystem, introduced us relatively anonymously, although with LinkedIn it's hard to be truly anonymous these days, to meet with these institutions and understand their real on-the-ground experience. So you can read the stats, but it's great to actually hear it and see it for yourselves. And I remember making the trips up during the depths of COVID, and Avanti ran on time. But making the train journey up and having the carriages yourself was a bit of a luxury. But we got to see Birmingham in a very interesting light, and we met with all these folks, and that's what gave us the confidence to make that decision. So for us, it was actually an essential element of that and bringing us here.
Fantastic. And I mean, the connectivity is so important, right? I came from London this morning and it was a very short, quick journey, and no disruptions, so it also ran on time. Yes. Maybe pick up on the skills point. I know, Alex, obviously such an important industry, legal industry, when it comes to skills. So do you want to comment a bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, welcome to my home. All of you. I am born and bred Brummie, so I very much have a vested interest in this city and its region thriving. So the skills agenda, look, I think we have some challenges in this city. We have incredibly high youth unemployment, heavily impacted by COVID. The nature of some of our sectors here in the city is such that that cut deep for us. And we have levels of deprivation that really need to be addressed. So one of the things that, hopefully with increased devolved powers, and I will advocate later potentially for even more, the mayor can really start to understand on a micro level where we could perhaps focus our efforts and our energies, how we can address some of the challenges in some of our communities and how we can help to address that skills piece. And of course, already, hopefully, with looking at things like the apprenticeship levy and looking at retraining people, looking at maybe more senior people being taken on an apprentice model for their second career, third, fourth, fifth career. Those are the sorts of things that hopefully we can look at through the devolved powers to a Metro Mayor.
Yeah. Fantastic. Do you want to add anything to...
So I guess I might talk more broadly. So we did some research, PwC, around the framework for growth over the last few months. And we spoke to 1,200 business leaders across the UK's regions and nations and asked them actually what would they find would really enable growth. And the three things they talked about as the priorities, and actually they were consistent across all regions of the UK, were skills which you won't be surprised about, infrastructure and planning, and resilient digital transformation. What was really interesting though in the conversation was what they weren't asking for was lots of sector-specific strategies. They were asking for, I guess, broad business-based support, and really importantly, they were asking for that support at a local level. And that was specifically around areas like skills, as you've just said, Alex, planning and infrastructure, where there's a real kind of call for business that regional leadership needs to be empowered to drive that change. But actually, I think what's quite important to maybe think about is how that regional focus actually links up to the national strategy. Because I think what comes through really strongly in the Green Paper when we read it is that it's going to prioritise sectors that are going to be able to compete internationally. And I think to compete internationally, we need to scale. And therefore, I think thinking really carefully that we focus on specific places and sectors and make sure we're not competing across different aspects of the UK. So I think as part of that, and in order to engage business, there are, I guess, a few things that need to be in place to support both business and the devolved governments coming together. So firstly, if there's something about what are those transparent guidelines about how investment decisions are taken nationally, regionally and locally. The second thing is actually, do MCAs have the mechanisms so they can actually really effectively join up the national strategy with the local strategy? I was in a session earlier, sort of last week with the Treasury, and they were very clear they didn't want to hold the MCAs back, but they wanted to set the national strategy. So there is at the moment a sort of dual running approach. So I think as that comes through over the next, I guess, weeks and months, making sure there's a mechanism so that local leaders can connect nationally to get that kind of international growth that we're looking for. And finally, I think what's really important for business is there is a really clear understanding of the decision-making process. So where investment decisions are made in a regional context, there's a very clear way in which business can engage with that so that they feel part of and can support and invest in their own way to make sure the success of the MCAs is their success as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I think, you touched on a really important point there in terms of that connectivity and kind of strategy cascading. We've been calling government for a long time to have a clear strategy around investment, and we now do have the talks about the investment agency. We've got the new industrial strategy, which will kind of help set, I guess, the focus at that national level. So then how does that cascade down through all the other levels? So maybe on that, staying with you, Rachel, for a moment. So you've touched on that sort of cascading, connectivity, consistency. There is currently disparity across regions in terms of devolved powers they have, and some of them don't really have. Some have Metro Mayor, some don't. So I guess keen to hear your thoughts on, well, first of all, how can we ensure greater consistency and how it can benefit things and drive even further regional growth?
So there's quite a lot in there, isn't there? And I think there's also 50% of the UK sits outside an MCA at the moment. So actually, it's going to be very clear that whilst there'll be a lot of growth coming through city regions and through the MCAs, there does need to be a mechanism for businesses to engage and work with local leaders to drive growth outside of the MCA region. So I think there is definitely a need to be more consistent. I think the other thing is where you've got more consistency, actually businesses know how to engage. So most businesses, I suspect, sat in the room and online, don't just operate in one region, they operate in a series of regions. So actually then making it as easy as possible for businesses to know where to engage so they can feed into strategies, but also can then take actions both locally and nationally to support those strategies being successful. So one of the things I guess we've called out for as PwC as part of our response to the Green Paper is what are the forums to support effective delivery across the UK. So whether it's an MCA, whether it's other investment areas, the importance of establishing forums that bring together stakeholders from priority sectors, from economic clusters, but also enabling industries, so critically financial and professional services as part of that. And actually those forums shouldn't just be talking shops, they should be really collaborative and action orientated and actually providing real-time feedback, because actually whether it's done consistently across in unitary authorities or MCAs, what's more important is that the action is taken and that they're adjusted to market conditions, because as Bruce said at the beginning, we're not in a stable position. We're going to need to respond to the market, and actually having a feedback loop for local leaders is going to be really important. And I guess the final bit for me is then thinking about where it's consistent, as I said right at the beginning, that enables business to engage much better and mean they can make decisions and have that stability going forward. So more consistency is definitely good for me.
Absolutely. Gurjit, did you want to comment on any of that from a consistency perspective?
So our journey here has been interesting in the sense that we have a very large office, as a hub in London, and in coming to the city, our primary driver was talent. That's our raw commodity. We run on talent, and looking at the sort of the strengths of the region, the academic institutions, the demographics, the diversity are all great foundations. But of course, there are challenges as well. We have a relatively, compared to nationally, higher level of unskilled population here, especially the younger demographic. And these are challenges, I think, that institutions, both public and private, can come together, and having a strategy both here national but also tailored for locally is going to be important to help address that. Because as the comments were made, to prosperity is important not just for some but for all in the region.
Yeah. And, what are some of the strategies, I guess, that you've been talking to the local authority here about the talent and some of the things that you think can be done in that space?
So we operate, we think about it over a spectrum, so it's not just graduates, but we primarily hire graduate talent. So for that we have established connectivity with the local universities. That's something we've always done. That's not a new thing. The apprenticeship program is something that we're trying to get started here as well. We've had that established in London. We want to replicate that here. We think that's a very successful model to help fund and finance through universities whilst providing an amazing opportunity and experience and hopefully gainful employment at the end. But we also then go further down and say, how do we inspire at the schools level? So I spent a day a couple of weeks ago with one of the schools of the Core Education Trust here in Birmingham, the Jewellery Quarter Academy, and I spent a day there teaching year 10s to think about work experience, how to apply for it, build CVs, cover letters, mock interviews, and I would say the potential is there. And I think those are the sort of things that I think the local authority, the mayoral model, can help do and tailor it for the region and get business to work with these public institutions to help both inspire, provide opportunity, training, all these things.
Yeah. Laura, have you seen the sort of the Metro Mayor model help influence and I guess create connectivity between the education policy and the local skills improvement plans?
At some level, we've got the devolution of some funding, so we have the adult education budget, which we can deploy. And I think the advantage of that devolution, and obviously we'd like to see funding for younger ages devolved down through us, allows us to work with our businesses to understand what the skills gap are that they have, and then apply that kind of funding to try to train on a more bespoke level. And whether that's working with professional services partners like are on this panel, or at one point through the pandemic, we applied some of that to train bus drivers because our bus companies didn't have enough drivers. So, but the principle that the region knows best what skills it needs is absolutely the right one. And then I think it's just important to say we have such amazing charitable businesses in Birmingham and the West Midlands. There is really, for those of you who aren't from here or know here, there is really a sense of pride in wanting to give back. And I think the mayor can be a focal point for asking our business leaders to take those days out and to go talk to young people and to try to help shift some of the challenges around youth unemployment. And to be fair, asking for, I think 20,000 apprentices to be taken on by our key businesses is really met with a huge amount of goodwill by the businesses here. And I think just even having that single point of focus about what we want to focus on all together. So in this case, it's youth unemployment and trying to get some of those kids who are furthest away from work back into work, the rallying cry of this is what is important to the region and this is what we're asking the region's businesses to do, allow it to come together and work really effectively. Otherwise, you run the risk of having lots of industry having their own conversations in different ways, targeting different groups. You don't get the impact that having the focus based on the evidence of what the region needs, which is where I think that it's a helpful benefit.
Yeah, go in. And I guess there's something about the data that you hold, because I think obviously the interventions that you make need to be really relevant and appropriate for the different cohorts of different deprivation or different ethnic backgrounds or experiences, and actually having a place for which you can hold that data safely and then facilitate the right conversation, I think is really important. We've seen that in work we've done in Manchester, and I think it's equally relevant. We talked about it over dinner last night, didn't we, Alex, as to the role that you play is absolutely critical in making that happen.
Yeah, because the lobby from the public sector to the public sector is one way to do it. But there are a lot of forums by which the private sector or the universities or other partners making that argument, again, on behalf of the region is more powerful than the public sector talking to the public sector. So having that single sort of set of where the North Star, where we're all trying to head to, and the reasons why at a regional level that's well articulated allows us all to be more successful in, whether it's trying to attract money for R&D or innovation accelerators or incubators to try to drive that economic growth forward, because ultimately everybody wants the same thing, if for slightly different reasons.
Yeah, a great example of that is this is a region where small and medium-sized businesses thrive. We have many of them, and for instance, to do an apprenticeship scheme, you require a certain critical mass. The university has to invest in that, and it's not worth doing for 5 or 10 apprentices. They need 30, 50. And that may be too large for one of these companies. So it's important to be able to convene and bring together institutions which have like needs to be able to create these cohorts, larger cohorts, which make it just economically more viable as well.
Yeah. I love the comment about the North Star, that sort of common goal and objective that drives this almost like a community spirit. Everyone's working together towards that common goal. That's fantastic, and it's really great to see that it's also enabling this collaboration between businesses and sharing within that common objective and goal. So it's amazing to see, and clearly so positive. Alex, I might come to you because you did flag early on that you would like to talk about more. So what further powers would you like to see devolved to local leaders that would help remove barriers and drive more growth and this collaboration?
Well, look, we've just touched on skills. So before we leave that, I think it's exactly Laura's point about looking much earlier than 19. 19 is too late. It's too late for us to affect a change that's going to impact a generation. So we need to be able to access kids and to inspire them in the way that Gurjit's describing. Arguably even sooner than year 10, just get as early as we possibly can, allow those access points. And then picking up at, both Laura and Rachel's points here, I think the combined authority, the mayor, can play a key role in coalescing, bringing the right parties together with that North Star focus. And then to Rachel's earlier point, actually sharing best practice. You were talking last night about what takes place in Manchester. Well, let's not reinvent a wheel. If there is something that's worked, let's replicate that. Let's replicate that model. And there is a huge willingness. And at the moment, because the mayor can only look at the sort of 19 plus agenda, all of us as individual businesses have numerous requests for help. We don't know where the best route is for us to go to. We do work with charities, or we might have a link with a school or some further education establishment. But actually, some means of bringing all of that together would be tremendously powerful. So that's the skills ask. I think there's a whole load of other things that we could look at. I mean, getting deeper into planning. I mean, I'd just rip it up and start again personally, but that's a personal view. But being able, the mayor to have real powers over, facilitating progress, speeding up processes, would be tremendously helpful. We want to build houses in this region. We want to focus on brownfield sites. Of course, we do. There are huge challenges with brownfield sites by definition. There are remediation works that need to be done. So having the ability to tap into the funding to be able to do that here and elsewhere in the country is essential to make those investments make sense and stack up. So there's that piece. Last night we were talking about healthcare challenges and again thinking about some of the complexities about devolving that wholesale. But actually, if you separated out the preventative piece to the healthcare provision that we currently have in this country, that might be an angle that we could look at in terms of devolved powers, that we could really help to address that.
Rachel wants to go on.
Yeah.
I'm going to deploy you down to Whitehall.
We were involved in something called the Pathways to Co-work Commission at PwC, working with Barnsley Council to look at, I guess, economic inactivity. And one of the key themes that came up is, well, one, it's very complex as to why people aren't working, but actually one of the key reasons is their health position, but also the kind of housing and the support structures they have around them. But again, it goes back to the data that's available. So if you look at the Pathways to Work Commission, the interventions are required by lots of different organisations and lots of different local leaders, including business leaders, to help those people into work. And I think one of the challenges we face as business leaders is we don't simply have enough access to skilled staff to grow our businesses. So I think the migration lever is harder to pull, but there's a real opportunity, I think, particularly through the combined authorities, to think about how you start to tackle economic inactivity and bring together parties in local areas to really make these interventions. Again, back to the data. The data's held in NHS trusts, in businesses, in the Department for Education, in schools, in universities. So how could the MCA potentially coalesce around a challenge like economic inactivity so we can bring more people into our businesses to help impact on economic growth?
Yeah, love that.
So I just quickly, just to add to that, I'm in obviously violent agreement on that. We're working, hopefully we'll see in the Devolution white paper something about regional planning, maybe Dare to Dream something about DWP data sharing agreements in order for us all to work more effectively together. I think the important thing about regional working is understanding what needs to be done regionally and what needs to be done locally. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that combined authorities struggle with, but of course we want to do things regionally, but we only want to deliver things that can only be delivered regionally. So things like transport infrastructure, which require that regional delivery. I think one element of combined authorities that is starting to grow and is really important is how do we make sure that we deploy that delivery into community-based organizations who are really best placed to reach communities in a way that combined authorities aren't set up to do. So as they are coming into existence, as those of us who have been in existence are growing and learning, I think it's that challenge about making sure our job is to advocate, to bring money into the region, and then to allow that to flow through to the level that's closest to the community. And we certainly don't want to be duplicating the work of, that's already good work happening in communities. But that tie-up sort of that ecosystem through a place is one of the things all combined authorities are working to get better.
It's such an important focus. Just quickly, on the whole data sharing, I think it's just such a unique opportunity, right? Because it sounds like you're in this perfect position to facilitate that within the region, and then maybe we can learn from that and amplify it, because I think we can all benefit from a bit more data sharing. So it's really great to hear that is something that you're already looking at, and I think that sort of identifying specific needs and driving investment to those areas is so critical. And I've been, obviously Birmingham's done really well, being the second sort of city investment destination in the UK. So what been some of the things that worked well in the area, and what are some of the things that you think could be done better going forward?
There's a lot that can be done better. So the city region is complicated. We have 3 cities in the region. So we've got Birmingham, which is just of a vastly different size, but also Wolverhampton and Coventry, which are very different cities to each other, and again to the city of Birmingham. And then the Black Country, which has a different set of challenges, as others have commented, a lot more SMEs that are really struggling to sort of to be able to modernize as opposed to shut down. And then we have elements of the conurbation that are almost rural, sort of bits of Solihull and bits of Walsall. So the challenge is what we've done well is if you look at capital revenue devolution and powers over the past 8 years, the graph has gone one way. So we have been able to help liberate, shall we call it, funding from central government into regional government and allow that to be deployed in a smarter way. But it's a challenge because there are just under 3 million people in the region, and the challenges are not the same in every bit of the region. But what I would say is we need our cities to thrive. They're an absolutely important part of it. We don't have a world-class transport network. We are trying to build one, and building one is painful and slow, but it really, really matters. And then, the skills agenda, I think, as others have commented, we just have a long way to go to get the kind of skills that we need into the region. So it's been fabulous, and over the past 8 years, I think unlike anybody except London, we've also seen a change of mayor. But interesting to see that most mayors are about the place, and it's a different sort of political model than you might see, and encouraging, London, most of you are probably from London or living around London, moved between radically different mayors over a number of different terms. And I think it's a testament to the maturity of the model that in this region too, we've been able we've only ever until recently known one mayor, have a new mayor, but again, the priorities are similar, and they are about the place, and they're grounded in the place. And I think that's a good testament to the model itself.
I think that place is important, and I think we should shout out a bit more about it. Our experience has been, we didn't relocate from London to Birmingham. We seeded it with 30 employees because somebody has to interview people. So they came from all over the world, Singapore, India, the US, London as well. And we've been able to attract talent from a variety of different industries. The great thing about this region is it's not just business and financial services, which many of us represent, but there's a thriving gaming sector, life sciences, automotive, and things like technology cut across all of these as skills. These are different industries with we have same engineering skills required, and we've been able to grow from 30, literally landed 3 years ago, almost to the day, to we're now 420 employees with another 150 contingent workers. So that's nearly 20-fold in 3 years. We see more potential for growth, but it is possible, and I think that clustering effect is important. Many regions have it in different industries. I think we need to make more noise about it. The region has to publicize it, and I think that success attracts success. So I think that would be helpful for the region as well.
Yeah.
And I think the mayor and also his department can actually be very helpful in that, because they cut across everything and they can help push that narrative out, both not just nationally but internationally. I think the point about this region, it's important not to just be a satellite of London. It's really important for us to be globally relevant here and be globally impactful and succeed. That's how I measure myself here in the office. I need to champion our Birmingham office and make sure it's successful globally.
Yeah.
Gurjit, I just wanted to jump in on that point, because I think there is such an important role for a metro mayor in being that ambassador for a region, being that figurehead nationally and internationally, looking at FDI and being that person that people will associate with a region. I think is so important. They can be a talisman for the region. So I think that is such an important point. And then the other point you make, of course, is that global recognition. There's a piece for me about brand that's embedded in that. I have a personal view as to what we should call ourselves, for instance, which Laura might not like. But there is a whole piece around brand for me. And Rachel mentioned earlier this industrial strategy that we're putting together, how that looks like regionally. What we can't have, and Richard has himself talked about this, is you just cover up the name and it could be any region. That's how are we going to articulate a differentiator for our region? How are other cities around the country going to differentiate themselves from and others so that they stand out globally?
Yeah.
And I think leveraging cultural assets is extremely important. We have a rich cultural heritage here in the region, and I think we can do more with that.
Yeah. I think that some really interesting points here that maybe we'll unpack further as we go through the questions as well. I think to your point around the industrial strategy and what is it for the region, I think is really important, because also from a perspective of driving investment, we can't just do it all based on the regional economy. We need to drive investment, and I think UK has strong credentials internationally around attracting investment into infrastructure. But what is it that's unique for this region to drive those investment flows is going to be quite critical, and so I think that they're very good points. I love your point around the brand and the positioning of Birmingham, because personally, observing it from afar, I've also seen the real change in almost like the narrative about Birmingham. Like it's genuinely becoming its own. It's got its own identity now, which maybe in the past it didn't have as much of. So that's been really great to see from the distance. So look, Laura, I might come back to you. Just give your thoughts on, I guess, what's kind of lessons learned, what's next. So government has committed to the expansion of the Metro Mayor model. We've just talked about all the benefits, and there's obviously opportunity for more consistency. So I guess, given your experience, what's been some of the lessons learned and some of the principles we would urge government to apply to future devolution areas?
Well, in addition to what Alex has already commented on, I think the most exciting thing that, so ourselves in Greater Manchester are considered to be trailblazing combined authorities, and one of the advantages to that is in the next financial year, we will get something called a single settlement, which are just very boring words, but let me just explain in practicality what that means for the region, which is, at the moment, we administer, I think it's just about 90 different grants, each of which have different terms, each of which have different metrics, each of which have different reporting responsibilities. It's an absolute nightmare. And it's really difficult to move money that is designated to be used for housing retrofit to think about whether or not you could, I don't know, retrofit a bus station, for example. So it's really ineffective use of funding. And next year we will see our funding, some of our funding, come in 5 pillars, whether it's around the economy or transport or housing or skills or net zero. And there is a much more exciting word, fungibility, between these pots of money, which mean that we should be able to be driven by outcomes. So if we build X amount of new houses, then we should be allowed to define what's affordable regionally, and to do that regionally in the way that best suits us, as opposed to having to tick every single box when we put our grant application in and then respond to it. So we are really pushing hard for, as we move into the spending review, to secure a longer-term devolved single settlement based on trust and outcomes and the ability for us to get on and do it. Mayors around the country are ready to be held more accountable. But government still needs to let go in a pretty significant way to allow regions to be held accountable for the outcomes they deliver. But this is a good first step in it. And I often talk about it this way, but when we were simply a transport authority before we had a combined authority, we could build bus stations, right? You build bus stations on access and egress, on staff and needs and footfall, and it's quite straightforward. But now when we think about building a bus station, we definitely don't think about building a bus station. We think about building a place that has something for the community, that maybe gives back to the environment, potentially could have housing above it if we did it carefully. We think about the way that it integrates into a place. Does it offer a space for skills development to come together? And that should be the point of combined authorities, and with fiscal devolution, is to be able to get 2 and 2 to make 10. And to get better outcomes for the region by using powers and freedoms more effectively. So at the minute, we've taken half a step, and what we're really keen is to take that full next step into the next spending review, and then to allow us in Manchester get on, and we would really relish the chance to prove that we know how to do this.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to finish our formal part of the discussion on. I think, allow you guys to focus on outcomes, but do what is best for the region and really take that accountability. So I think we can go to the audience questions. And while I did have one here before, it has disappeared. So I'm not sure whether there you go. There you go. It's back on. So what can the different metro mayors and CMAs learn from each other? Is best practice being shared across, I guess, the metro mayors and CMAs?
I suppose that's one for me. Yes, there is what was called the M10 network, but now there are more than 10. So it's called the Metro Mayors Network, and they do meet regionally. And I think one of the first things the Prime Minister did was bring them together as a council of regions and nations. So the mayors alongside the devolved nations as well to work together. There's an element, they'll always be slightly in competition with each other, but there are certain things that are really important to advocate for together. So bus funding is a fabulous example where mayors all have some element of control over their transport network. They'd like to see investment in infrastructure and to making sure that people can get to work. So there is that. I think, too, the other thing that's important is, and it's challenging because this country is not actually that big, but it's got a lot of city region areas. It's got a lot of identity for a fairly small country, at least the one that I come from. And I think it is this challenge of being able to find your own unique identity, but not have everything carved up. One of the things I fear is that they'll say, obviously we're not going to compete in offshore wind, right? We don't have an advantage of that in the West Midlands. No. But if you do take culture or film production, there are different parts of this country that all contribute to that. And I think it becomes a little bit complicated. And sometimes I think government's tendency is to say, we'll just let Liverpool do that, let Manchester do that, the West Midlands can do that, and then we can just have everybody doing something different, and that would be nice. But it's not how economies work. So we've got this big challenge with the industrial strategy to get the national narrative right, the regional narratives right, and to think about it both as places, but as a whole system for investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a big challenge, but what an exciting opportunity for us all to fit into that and contribute to that and ensure that we're setting the right framework for our growth. So thank you very much to the panel. Really appreciate the frank conversations, your thoughts and views. It's been fantastic to hear from you and hopefully sets the scene for the rest of the day. So thank you.
Thank you.